The New York Giants are sticking with General Manager Joe Schoen despite the lack of results. But should they? We're going to break it all down for you next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, or if you're making us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. All right, Giant fans, you've been waiting for this episode, and we're finally getting around to it. We're going to take a look at General Manager Joe Schoen. Now, Joe Schoen is being retained by ownership, who fired Brian Daboll on Monday. Joe Schoen announced as being retained in a statement released by the team, saying that, he's going to help lead the search for the next head coach. So we're going to take a look at Joe Schoen's role in what has gone wrong for the New York Giants, because he's got to take part of the responsibility. So we'll look at his role, then we'll take a look at the good, bad, the ugly. So we'll look at the cap management, we'll look at trades, we'll look at the draft, all that stuff, all the roster building decisions. And then, is it the right decision? Is management making the right decision? And spoiler alert, I'm not so sure they are. Even though the evidence might suggest otherwise, I'll tell you why I don't think they are. All right, so let's get into it. Again, welcome on into everybody. All right, so coaching was a big problem. We know that. Brian Daboll is no longer here, and I outlined last Friday numerous reasons why I thought Brian Daboll had to go. Joe Schoen, remember, he came in with Brian Daboll at the same time. The Giants finally, after years of having the GM and the head coach on two different timelines, they finally got it right. They finally brought in a head coach and a GM together on the same timeline to build something up. The Giants moving forward apparently are going back to their old ways, where now the GM is on one timeline and the head coach is going to be on another one. That to me is a mistake, which I will get into later. Right? My feeling is that Schoen and Daboll, they were joint partners in the building up of this franchise, and they should equally share the results that they have been getting. All right. So it's not all on Brian Daboll. It's also on Joe Schoen. But let's take a look, okay? So Joe Schoen, one thing he has done well, and we've got to give him kudos for, is when it has come to the draft and finding depth pieces on day 3, he's done a pretty good job of that. All right, so day 3 in 2022, he came up with Daniel Bellinger, Dane Belton, Micah McFadden, DJ Davidson, all guys who are playing a key role on today's roster. 2023, that was a wash. Just that class was probably the worst class of Shane's 4 so far. 2024, the day 3 picks he came up with, who have become valuable contributors: Theo Johnson, Tyrone Tracy, Darius Muasa. 2025, day 3 picks: Cam Scadaboo, Marcus Bowe, Thomas Fidone, Corey Black. They're all contributing in some way, shape, or form. Scadaboo, of course, is on IR. Where Schoen has kind of fallen down when it's come to the draft is in the premium department. All right, so let's go back to 2022. Kayvon Thibodeau, okay, he's a starter, and he's not bad, but is he elite? Probably can't say that just yet. Evan Neal, been a bust. All right. Now, whether that's on coaching or just whatever the case may be. And remember, Evan Neal coming out of college, he was highly touted as a draft prospect, a top 10 prospect. He has not worked out. So we've got to call him a bust. Wan'Dale Robinson, he's come on. All right. Is he top tier? I wouldn't quite put him there, but he's solid. Joshua Azudu, the kid's been injured, and when he's been out there, inconsistent. So I don't think we can say that he's been, a solid pick. And Cordell Flott, well, he's starting now. So, again, not a star, solid, but, nothing to really write home about. 2023, Deonte Banks, kid's got talent, but he just can't pull it together. And I think that's the case of coaching. When they upset the apple cart and they implemented the system that they're currently running. Deonte Banks he's immature, number one. And number two, just not a fit for what they do right now. John Michael Schmitz has been better this year. But is he a top center in the class, as he was touted coming out of college? I wouldn't say that. Jalen Hyatt, bust. All right. Now, again, whether that's because of coaching or what, I don't know, but you got to look at the results. Jalen Hyatt, a guy they traded up for, and they have not gotten a return on the investment. 2024, Malik Neighbors is a star. Tyler Nubin is regressing, so the jury's still out on him. Drew Phillips looks like he's going to be okay. Jury's still out on him. 2025, Abdul Carter is going to be a stud. He's not just yet, but he's, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt since it's still early. Jackson Dart, that's a home run hit. Darius Alexander can go either way. He's showing promise, but he's just not there yet. So there's been a big difference between the day 3 picks made by Joe Schoen and the first 2 days. And really, if you're not hitting on the first 2 days, which are really the easiest picks, I think, to hit, that's a problem. So you have to ask yourself, has it been the coaching or the player selection? Now, the Giants will never tell us that a particular player was the particular pick of, say, a coach or of Shane or a Brandon Brown or whoever. They say it was a team pick. So we'll never know who picked who exactly. But the draft, has it been, have they been stellar drafts? Nah, the jury's still out on a lot of them. So that's been a big problem because the draft is the core of building a team. And when you look at the talent that this team has, they have some talent in some spots, but they are lacking in others. And it's showing up. Right now, no Malik Neighbors. Well, the receivers, are they anything to write home about? Not really. Right? The offensive line has been good, but it could use some depth. It doesn't have enough young depth, and that's a problem because they keep plugging that with veterans. At some point, you got to plug that up with young depth. They haven't been able to do that. The defensive secondary, still a mess. Okay? They had to go and they replaced two-fourths, or one half, I should say, of the defensive secondary with 2 veterans in free agency, who right now the jury is still out on them. The front 7 on the defense, well, the defensive line, again, stacked up with veterans. That defensive line, that run defense is just not good. The edge rushers, talent. There's talent there. We'll talk about that coming up. So there's still a lot of work, a lot of holes on this roster 4 years into Joe Schoen's tenure that the draft has not addressed. Now, what about free agency and all that stuff? I'm going to talk about that after this when I get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of Joe Schoen's tenure. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As the days get shorter and the nights come earlier, it can start to feel a little heavier, especially when life is already packed with work, family, and everything else. This season, it's so important to reach out and check in with friends, family, or even with yourself. Just like checking in on a teammate or reconnecting with someone you haven't seen in a while can lift your spirits, reaching out for therapy can make a real difference too. BetterHelp makes that first step easier by connecting you with a licensed therapist online from wherever you are. Therapy isn't just for when things are falling apart. It's about staying balanced and growing through the tough seasons. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist who fits your needs, and you can switch anytime if it's not the right match. Over 5 million people have used BetterHelp, and with 30,000 therapists available, finding support is really just a few clicks away. This month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it simple to take that first step. Listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Because taking that first step towards support might just leave you wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. Coming up tomorrow, Crossover Thursday, myself, Peter Bukowski, host of Locked On Packers, will get you ready for this weekend's game. New York Giants against the Green Bay Packers. The Giants, of course, kicking off the Mike Kafka era. So we'll have some answers, hopefully, on where Jackson Dart is in the concussion protocol, as well as other injuries related questions and matchups and all the good stuff that you've come to expect from Crossover Thursday. Hope you will tune in. All right. We're taking a look at General Manager Joe Schoen. And in this segment, we're going to take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly of his tenure. All right. So among the topics I want to talk about here include free agency and his trades. I want to talk about the talent that's been let go or not retained. And I want to talk about things like cap management, free agency value, and so forth. All right, so let's get into it. We'll start with trades, actually. Shane's been pretty good with trades. All right, so Brian Burns comes to mind. He's been paying dividends for them. You can make a case that trading up into the first round to get Jackson Dart, that was a good move. Right now, the trade to move up in the third round for Jalen Hyatt, that has not worked out. The trade up to get Deonte Banks, that has not worked out. So some of the trades have been really good. The ones that he's hit on have been really grand slams, and the ones that he hasn't kind of dragged the batting average down a little bit. Let's talk about free agency. The key free agents that they have brought in that have really worked out for them. Jermaine Illuminor comes to mind. Okay, he's been solid. Greg Van Roten has been solid. All right. Bobby Okereke, I think you can say has been solid, although he's kind of dropped off a little bit. But the free agents, overall, I think you can say in some cases Joe's had to overpay for guys. John Runyon Jr. was a guy he had to overpay for. Devin Singletary, he overpaid for. And, when you look at free agents, and this is an exercise I'm going to do in more detail on New York Giants on SI, probably during the bye week. The Giants, can you honestly say that they have gotten their money's worth on the free agents they have brought in? I don't think you can. For example, they overpaid for Devin Singletary, and he's not even technically a starter. All right. If Cameron Scatterboo doesn't get hurt, Devin Singletary barely plays, but yet they overpaid for him. You can make a case that, why did they bring in 2 quarterbacks this past offseason if they, were intent on drafting a quarterback? Well, you could say, well, maybe they didn't know. But still, wouldn't it have made sense to bring in 1 veteran quarterback, see if you couldn't draft one, and if not, maybe sign one on the cheap instead of paying the money that you had to dish out for both Russell Wilson and for Jameis Winston? Probably would have. Going back to trades, Can we forget about the Darren Waller trade? Now, at the time, Darren Waller was brought in as part of a big mistake that Joe Schoen had going into that year 2 of building up the roster. And that is Joe Schoen overestimated the growth of the roster based on the 9-7-1 season that they had, the playoff season. Schoen thought they were further along than they really were. He was blinded by the postseason and the success, which in retrospect, and this is something I always say when it comes to a new coaching staff, when you have a new staff that has never worked together, it takes the league a little bit of time to build up film and figure out tendencies and trends. And we kind of saw that in that first year because the Giants, after going 7-2 to start that season, they only won 2 more regular season games because the league started to catch up with them. But Joe Schoen looked at the overall picture and said, no, we're better, we're further along than we are. And it's funny because the following year or a couple years down the line, he actually admitted that he overestimated the roster. That was a big mistake. And that, folks, is probably a big reason why the Giants struggled to get out of the gate and are still trying to catch up 4 years into Joe Schoen's tenure. But going back to that Darren Waller trade, the guy had an injury history. And the Giants, although they didn't give up a whole lot, I think they just gave up a 3rd-round pick, if I remember correctly, that they got in the Kadarius Toney trade, which, by the way, was a good trade for them there. They got a guy who was injured. And then they get this guy, and they don't use him to the best of his ability when he is on the field and healthy and able to play. So what was there, a disconnect between Joe Schoen and what the coaches wanted? I don't understand that. And then, Schoen, doubles down and he says, oh, I'd make that trade all over again. No, you wouldn't. Knowing what you know now, no, you wouldn't. I'm telling you that right now. So that was a problem. Talking about ugly, look at all the talent that's walked out of this building. One thing about Schoen that comes across, or my interpretation at any rate, is that if he is rejected in negotiations, he kind of acts like a spurned lover. So, for example, when he was going back and forth with Saquon Barkley, and he didn't want to, pony up the guaranteed money, he started pulling offers off the table, saying, you know what? You don't want this offer? Fine. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. He did the same thing with Julian Love. And what happened? Barkley and Love went on to different teams, and they're doing pretty well for themselves. And it's just, if you're going to make the offer and say to a guy, okay, you know what, here's the offer, the guy should have the right to see if he can get a better offer. Don't just say, well, you didn't take my offer, so the heck with you, I'm pulling it back off the table. No. If you're budgeting that money, don't say, oh, well, I'm going to take that money and I'm going to spend it elsewhere. It's not how you build a roster. And that's kind of how Schoen has approached it. And I don't agree with that. Okay, let's talk about the Daniel Jones contract. Now, I know a lot of you didn't like that contract and it didn't work out, but to Schoen's credit, he put an escape hatch in that contract. He kind of had to do what he did. Did he have to overpay Daniel Jones? That's debatable. But considering that the market was bad that year, considering where they were drafting, considering, what was going on with Saquon Barkley, I can tell you guys for a fact that had Joe Schoen had his druthers, he would have liked to have signed Barkley and used the franchise tag on Daniel Jones. But because he couldn't get it done with Barkley, he had to flip the script. So I'm a little bit more forgiving on that than I think a lot of you are. It still didn't work out. The Giants had to pay the price this year with dead cap money. That money comes off the books after this year. Okay, speaking of the salary cap, when Joe Schoen came in, he inherited a mess. It was a mess, and I said it was going to take 2 years for him to fix it. And he did. But here we are again, folks. The Giants have always been hovering around the bottom of the league in salary cap space. They are there again this year, and they have nothing to show for it. Now, next year, and I use over the cap as my reference, the Giants are minus 1.627 in effective cap space, which is basically the cap space they need to sign guys under the top 51. They have right now 17.334 million total cap space. Now, that does not include any carryover from this year or any postseason accounting. That is not a good cap situation, folks. They've got 10 guys who are making 10 plus million cap hits wise on next year's roster. That is as top heavy as you can get. And that is a result of constant restructuring combined with a refusal to add voidable years. Because if you're going to do restructuring, you should be using voidable years. And yet, for some reason, Shane doesn't use them. And I don't understand why. I've asked about that. And, I get the speech, the cap was a mess and we had to do this, that, and the other thing. Okay, but if your cap is a mess, use voidable years in your contracts. Because this way, if you have to move money around, you've got that safety net. The Eagles do this all the time. You ask me, how do the Eagles have so much cap space every year? This is why they use voidable years, amongst other vehicles, to help them with their cap. So I would not say that Joe Schoen's cap management has been stellar. All right, that's been a problem as well. So getting back to my point about next year, they're going to have to let a lot of guys go in order to fix their cap because it is a mess for next year. And, even if they carry over the 4 million, which I think they have now, they have about 4.5, I think, which I don't think they're going to have by the end of the year because they still have to get through the rest of the year. That's not going to be enough to carry over. And I did an article over on New York Giants on SI regarding players who are on track to earn incentives. There's a lot of guys who are not going to earn incentives. So they'll get a cap credit there, but it's just not going to be enough. So the cap is a problem. All right, free agency value. Some of the big ones, like I said, Devin Singletary, he's not a starter, but he's got the 19th highest running back contract, according to Over the Cap. Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland. All right, it's not their fault they've been hurt, but I don't know that either one of them is a Pro Bowler. Jermaine Illuminor has been a bargain, no question about it. And I give Shane credit for extending Dexter Lawrence and Andrew Thomas when he did, even though the two of them have had injury issues. Dexter had the season-ending elbow, and Thomas has had foot issues. Still, I give him credit for being proactive there. So just overall, not very good with the cap, in my opinion, and just some of the values that he places. And I didn't even talk about trade values. Not trading Darius Slayton last year, who, by the way, is signed to a 3-year, $36 million contract, which is, you would think a wide receiver too. And I don't know that he's a wide receiver too, to be honest with you. He sure as heck won't be next year if they go and they draft another receiver. So the value, it seems like Shane just overvalues some of his players. You look at last year at the trade deadline. He could have moved Azeez Ojulari for a 5th. I think he wanted a 4th. Darius Slayton, he could have moved him. He should have moved Saquon Barkley when he had the chance, but no, he said, no, we're not going to trade you. So that's been a problem. That's some of the ugliness that has helped to contribute to this unstable roster building process that the Giants have had under his watch. All right, so all that being said, did ownership make the right decision to retain Joe Schoen for the sake of continuity? Well, we'll talk about it right after this. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keeps you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Their part finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Their Trademaster perks like priority shipping and dedicated support make the whole process smoother. So go on and join the free Trademaster program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and the dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use the promo code SHNFL5 to get 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Hey, Giant fans, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. FanDuel offers a host of different ways to bet, and not just on the NBA, but also on the NFL, NHL, and so much more. Whenever you have a hunch, they make it easy, safe, and secure to get in on all the action, letting you bet the way you want to bet. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, everybody, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And did the Giants make the right decision? They have committed to keeping Joe Schoen on for the time being. The announcement from the team, quoting ownership, is saying that Joe Schoen will lead the search for the next head coach. Here's my thinking on this, folks. We all know that John Mara is dealing with cancer. And if you've never had cancer treatments before, and I hope all of you listening out there have never had to deal with it, I have. It knocks the stuffing out of you to where you just don't have the strength some days to get out of bed, let alone function in a normal capacity. So I wonder if that had something to do with the decision to retain Joe Schoen. Now, historically speaking, the Giants don't fire GMs. The only GM that they fired, if I remember correctly, Jerry Reese. Dave Gettleman got to retire, and I use that with quotes, okay? George Young, obviously, he got to retire on his own accord. Ernie, of course, he retired. You know, the Giants don't fire GMs as a rule. So I wonder if Joe Schoen is being kept on in part, despite his hand in the building of this mess, because ownership, John Mara, who would probably, under normal circumstances, be involved with the head coaching search, just isn't up to it. That could be. But here's the thing I'm curious to see. Joe Schoen has one more year left on his contract. If the Giants are serious about this, if they believe that he is not part of the problem, which I would find very hard to believe because everybody has a hand in it, will they give him an extension? Now, it won't be a 5-year extension. I don't think it'll be a 3-year extension. But if you want this guy to lead your head coaching search, you better give him at least a 1 to 2 year extension. Otherwise, he's a lame duck. And that's going to be detrimental to your search, because what head coach is going to want to come in here and say, okay, you know what? I'm working with a lame duck GM. I don't know what I'm going to get after that. Do I really want to come here? And that's where the mistake is that the Giants are making. They should have done a sweep. You know, again, you can make the argument that Brian Daboll did a few good things while he was here. He did more, unfortunately, to hurt the team than he did to help the team. And it's a results-oriented business. So If Schoen is building the roster and the roster isn't fitting what the coaches want, or the roster isn't developing, or he overpriced veterans or whatever, he's got to take his share of the blame. Ownership doesn't see it that way. They're going to stick with him. Now, is it possible that, after the upcoming year, 2026, they say, all right, we're going to start all over again? Could be. But now you're back in that vicious cycle that they finally got out of back in 2022. And I will maintain that it is important for the GM and the head coach to be on the same timeline. I think where the Giants made their mistake with the hiring of Dable and Schoen, you had two guys who had never filled their roles that they were hired to fill before. I would have liked to have seen them hire either an experienced GM, and if they wanted to go with a first-time head coach, fine, or vice versa. But they went with inexperience across the board, and they can't make that mistake going forward, especially with the coaching search coming up. So here's where we're at, folks. The Giants 2-8. There are 7 games left. Mike Kafka's getting his audition. I was kind of hoping to see if maybe Brandon Brown would get a crack of things. If Schoen didn't last. Brandon Brown coming from that Howie Roseman school of GMing. But it's not going to happen. So for the time being, it is what it is, folks. We've got to just see what Joe Schoen can do. Has he learned from his mistakes? Can he get this team the talent it needs to get over the hump? But more importantly, can he come down with a list of suitable head coaching candidates who are going to continue to develop Jackson Dart, who are going to fix the defense and fix all that ails this team? That's the big question. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. As always, appreciate you tuning in and spending part of your day with us. For your next listen, get a double dose of the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler the Madman Rowland gives you a shot of espresso to start your football day, while Tony Wiggins takes you into the barbershop for the smoothest breakdowns to end the day. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, Giant fans, that'll do it for me. Don't forget, crossover Thursday tomorrow with Peter Bukowski of Locked On Packers. And then on Friday, I'm going to have some more thoughts on the fallout of the firing of Brian Dable. So I hope you'll tune in for that. Thank you as always, and I'll see you on Thursday.